So that's true. We still are here, and we're going to have a bit of a break, and we're going to come back and speak with Samira Mohyeddin. Let's now transition over to our next guest, Samira Mohyeddin, who it's a real honor to welcome to the program. Let me just tell you a little bit about them. So as a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and restaurant co-owner, Samira has made significant contributions to both news, media, and culture in Canada. Samira's extensive knowledge of Middle Eastern politics and her tenacity as a producer in navigating the complex world of mainstream media make their contributions even more inspiring to me and many others, I'm sure. And we are the beneficiaries of this most excellent work. Samira, thank you so much for taking this time. You know, you have revived my faith in the media.
Oh, wow. That's a big honor.
Well, you know, you are one of a few independent journalists in Canada who I've noticed over the last little while been spinning out some really relevant, important sort of things that one would always imagine this is what journalism is like. This is what informed people should be, able to access, or at least in order to be informed, able to access. So I thank you very much for that. And if listeners don't already know, you can look up On the Line Media, and you can find more resources, and we'll get around to discussing that as we go. And I'll just spell the name out for you. It's SAMIRA MOHYUDDIN. So really, we're excited to meet you like this. It's the first time that we're talking on radio. Maybe I can start with asking you to let listeners know a little bit about yourself, and maybe we can start with the growing up in Canada. I'm assuming, I don't know. So you can let us know whether you are a guest or a newcomer, whether you were born here or whether you're coming from elsewhere. I'm guessing that you're Persian, or do you like to be identified as Iranian? I don't know. Tell us.
I am Iranian. My parents, I wasn't born here. I was born in Iran. My parents immigrated to Canada on May 4th, 1979. And we've been here ever since, so 45 years.
And so where did you bounce into? Like, you came to Canada, where did you?
Actually, we bounced right into a place called Weekend, which is in eastern Quebec, in Drummondville, which, if people don't know, is, they like to boast in Drummondville that they are the place that Poutine was created. So my introduction to Canada was very Canadian in that sense. Wow. My aunt had been living here since the early 70s, and her husband had a massive industrial farm with like 200 cows, you know. Yeah. And so my introduction to Canada was tapping maple syrup trees and baling hay and, you know, riding on tractors. And today, Drummondville is a town of 1,500. Back then, I think there was maybe 400, 500 people. Wow. In the town. So we went from a metropolis of 8 million in Tehran to a town of 400. We didn't last there very long. My mom didn't want to stay in farm town. So after about a year and a couple months, we moved to Toronto. Okay.
And is that where you primarily then grew up and had most of your education and stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. But it was a little bit of a stint in New York City. So after high school, I moved to Manhattan to go to a theater conservatory there.
So it was that early, huh, that you got theater into you?
Yes, very early. Yeah, right after high school I went.
That must have been a real privilege of just shipping out there all of a sudden and being like put into that world.
You know, again, my aunt and uncle lived in Manhattan, and so when my mom was driving me to the auditions, this was for the American Musical and Dramatic Academy on the Upper West Side. She told me, I can't afford to send you to the school, and I said, no, Mom, I'm getting a scholarship, don't worry about it. And I did. I got the scholarship. And I was lucky enough that my aunt and uncle lived in Manhattan, so I didn't have to pay for room or board.
Okay.
Right? So
Nice.
I always say, I was never more poor than when I was in New York City, but I was never more happy.
Nice.
There is just so much coming at you at all times. And to do theater in a place like New York was just, it was a dream.
And so what happened? You went there, you went to school, and then?
I went there. I had finished theater conservatory. I came back to Toronto. I did a couple plays here, and then my parents were begging me to go to university. They were still under the impression that you go to university, you come out, you get a well-paying job.
Right.
So I went to the University of Toronto, and I did an undergrad in religious studies and Middle Eastern history. And then I continued and went on to do a master's in gender and modern Middle Eastern history.
And then where did you start thinking around journalism and that you wanted to move in that direction?
Yeah, journalism was always something that I was interested in. I was just a news junkie. But it wasn't until really, when I finished the master's in modern Middle Eastern history, my brother at the time was at George Brown in chef school, and I thought, I said to him, look, I would be really interested in opening a restaurant, because I had worked in restaurants all throughout undergrad and graduate studies. Right. And I knew the business very well, and I said to my brother, why don't we try and do things? So we opened up an Iranian restaurant, and then my sister came on board, and so we've had that restaurant now for 20 years. But at the 10-year mark, I decided, maybe I'll go to journalism school, because I was really always very interested. And I had started writing some opinion pieces that were getting published, and I wanted to know sort of the technical business side of the industry. And so I went to journalism school, and I got a placement, an internship at the CBC Radio, at a show called The Current, which is their national flagship current affairs show.
Wow. So that was, I thought that you might have had to come into the CBC and then work into it, but you got a placement right there. That's one of my favorite CBC shows. Not that I enjoy the CBC that much, but I do enjoy The Current. I think it's a really good quality program.
I love The Current. When I started there, Anna Maria Tremonti was the host, and I had been listening and following Anna Maria for years. I think she's one of my favorite journalists here in Canada. So it was a real treat to intern there. And it was a 6-week internship, and then that ended. And then I went and I worked for Vice a little bit. I worked for CTV News. And then The Current asked me to come back.
Okay.
After my schooling was done. So I went there, and I stayed there for close to 8 years.
Right.
That was my home base at CBC.
And while you were at The Current, you also did a few other things. Am I right? Or
Yes.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah. What was so great at the CBC was I was able to afford to host a lot while I was there. I think they noticed that I had a bit of a host bug. So I had pitched a podcast about food called Unforked, which they picked up and created a series out of. And then I also just, before I left, finished another podcast about the Syrian Revolution.
Gay Girl,
that I hosted and produced. Correct, yeah, Gay Girl Gone.
Gone, yeah.
Which was about a hoax.
Yes.
This woman named Amina, who everyone thought was this gay girl writing about the revolution in Damascus, but she actually turned out to be a white man in Georgia, pretending to be a gay girl in Damascus. And, she was, The Guardian interviewed her, she was in the New York Times, she was at CNN, and this man was just fooling everybody. It was interesting, like, it relates a lot, I think, to now, because due diligence was just thrown out the window the moment, they had their sort of archetype that they wanted to,
somebody who was already sensational that they could even sensationalize further.
One of the guests that we had on the show, I said, why do you think this was so successful? And he said 3 words, gay girl. forward, the gay girl in Damascus. There's nothing else to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That was
Such
the name
a
of the blog that she was writing.
That quote by, of course now I forget, but because you're a literary person, the guy comes to mind, Harold Pinter, I think it was.
Yes.
In his Nobel lecture, he a line that's always stuck out to me about the media is, well, just in general, I mean, foreign policy and all the rest of it, is that, it's a vast tapestry of lies that we each then feed upon. I just remember how much the media, how much that is a tool of the media. And what's really interesting to me, and I'd like to discuss with you a little bit more, are your experiences as producing at the CBC. Because from the outside, from somebody who does alternative media for a reason, and also for access and other things, I've been watching mainstream media from a biased perspective, at least from my own biased perspective. And I'm not sure, because I don't see it from the inside, to know really what it's like. But I remember also reading Michael Parenti, who is, among many things, a media critic, that was talking about the freedom that journalists feel like they have until they start approaching topics that are just not going to fly. And so I wonder what kind of experiences you had. I mean, we're talking about The Current, which still is quite a progressive show compared to other programs on the CBC that I've noticed. But in general, can you talk about your experiences there producing?
The Current has a mandate of nothing being off the table. And so there were no subjects that we didn't approach, we approached every subject that you could think of, from Wales to, Israel-Palestine. Mm-hmm. Everything was on the table, as long as it was a good pitch, interesting, and, we were as local as we were international and global. Mm-hmm. And it really was a sort of current affairs, zeitgeist magazine-type show, and still is, with Matt Galloway as the host now. Mm-hmm. But, when it came to certain subjects, and really the only one that I can really think of is Israel-Palestine, you quickly learned that, there were differences in how it was approached, and that there was a real fear around how you were going to program, what the script, there was an extra level of scrutiny, an extra level of verification when it came to Israel-Palestine, when it came to Palestinian guests. And you learn that just by doing, right? It's not something that I went into the CBC even knowing, but something that I constantly think about, and I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm old enough to remember this show, was a show called Counterspin. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember it. It was hosted by Avi Lewis.
Oh, yeah, of course, I remember that. That's right.
It was a television show.
Yes.
And it was a sort of spin-off, but it was CBC. And I always say, that show would never exist today, ever. Because we've fallen into this sort of... we'd like to think that, no subject is sort of untouched, or we can approach anything, but I feel like there's a real cowardice and fear that permeates journalism today that didn't exist, say, 20 years ago. And I don't know if it has to do with advertising. I don't know if it has to do with being beholden to stakeholders or what. But I just feel like journalism has taken a wrong turn somewhere, where I don't know if it's, as Mohammed El-Kurd calls it, the sort of politics of appeal. Journalists want to look like, I'm your friend, rather than, I'm somebody you should fear.
Samira, though, is it on particular issues, or would you say that it's still quite general on any interest group then? I mean, it just seems to me that there are particular issues like Israel-Palestine, which is a real hurdle for these reasons.
Of course it's on particular issues. Of course. One of the issues that I remember that I first sort of realized, I did genocide studies at university. I did a program at the University of Minnesota in genocide studies and human rights, and I learned extensively about the Armenian genocide, and so I'm very particular when it comes to sort of doing stories on it. And the 100th anniversary was something that I had pitched. And I remember someone in management saying, oh, I don't want to deal with the letters around that. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? And I started, digging into this. What does that mean, the letters? And I quickly learned that, there are people who abuse the role of the ombudsman, for instance. And so, Turkish groups would, whenever you would do a story on the Armenian genocide, would flood the emails of executive producers, managing editors, all this stuff, referring to your report or your program or panel or whatever it was put together as being biased, not fair, not balanced, all of that stuff. And then the other subject was Israel-Palestine. And again, that would be the same model. So flooding the emails of executive producers, managing editors, who would then turn around and say to you, oh, that's a good pitch, but I don't want to deal with the letters.
Fear and what were you saying there?
Well, because you have to answer every
You have
letter.
to answer. But you fear and cowardice is something.
Fear and cowardice
is a way because then you have to deal with this stuff, and you don't have it in you to deal with it, so you might as well soften the story or not go with it or
not do it.
Not
the
do
easiest
it.
thing is just to not do it, and or let news take care of it. That was one of the things I would hear too. Let news take care of that. Because we were current affairs, right? So they would say, oh, let the news department take care of that. Which, we don't do with other things, right? With other subjects. And the fear, I think, really comes from being called anti-Semitic. That's something else that I noticed. There's a real fear of that. And of course, Israel as a country weaponizes that against journalists, against media outlets.
Sure. I mean, Go ahead.
I think I was just going to say that one of the biggest things that Israel has done, and I don't know if it means to do this, but they've made a mockery of anti-Semitism, particularly over the past 15, 16 months. Everybody is anti-Semitic, from Oxfam to Human Rights Watch to Amnesty International. Everybody is painted with this brush of anti-Semitism, which has just made a mockery of the definition and real anti-Semitism. Right, which exists. Agreed. Yeah, no, it really has gone too far, and I think that people do see through this veneer, definitely. I hope so.
So, anything else that you want to share about your experiences at the CBC? Tell us a little bit about where listeners can still find your work at the CBC.
Well, yeah. So there's as I said, there's the podcast Unforked, which is available. We did 10 episodes, and we touched on everything from gastro-nationalism. That was another episode that got me in trouble because we looked at hummus. And how Israel had declared hummus their national dish.
Right.
And Palestinian chefs were saying, "Hello, we're over here." And so there's that. We touched on everything from gastro-nationalism to indigenous chefs sort of reclaiming their cuisine, and what Canadian cuisine even is, and it was really a passion project of mine, Unforked, and I think the listeners will really enjoy it because I think it's the best of Canada on air. When it comes to the culture and politics of food, and just lifting things off our plates. And then the other one, as I said, is Gay Girl Gone. I also did a lot of hosting on the CBC. So the show Tapestry, I was able to host that one summer, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was scrolling through that season. There was very interesting stuff on identity, I think, that I saw.
Yes, it was on identity and anger, and that was another great show. It's not on the air anymore, I think it was on the air for more than 30 years, but last year they said goodbye to it. So I don't know if those are actually available online still. They may be. I don't know.
It should be. I mean, there's always the time machine if folks want to catch it. So after quite some time at the CBC, you decided that it was time for you to move on for other projects that you were doing. Can you help us sort of understand this new aspect of your life, or the transition out of CBC into what you're doing now?
Sure. I had decided to leave the CBC around 2022 because I was getting a lot of requests from other places to do some writing and provide some analysis. So BBC, for instance, was coming to me. The Globe and Mail had asked me to write a couple pieces for them. And because of my permanent full-time position at the CBC, I was having to turn down a lot of opportunities that were coming my way. And one of the biggest ones was to go to Oslo for the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, which was awarded in 2023 to the Iranian political prisoner, Narges Mohammadi. And the Norwegian Journalism Institute had asked me to come there and do a bit of a seminar for them, and then I was going to also attend the Nobel Peace Prize, and I decided to write about it for the Globe and Mail. So this was an opportunity that I didn't want to pass up. So I decided, I'm going to resign. And then October 7th happened. And that really, October 7th really gave me the push I needed to get out of corporate media, because the way I was seeing what was happening in Gaza being reported was just totally unpalatable to me, and I realized I could not remain in that environment. And
because you would have had to adhere to those policies and those conditions.
I would have had to adhere, or I would have had to be exhausted all the time,
right?
And having to answer for what I was putting on my social media, because I was going on social media and saying, the Israeli spokesperson is lying, for instance, which he was.
Which he is, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, there was a moment where my managing editor said to me, you can't say he's a liar. And I said, but he's lying. And he said, well, it doesn't matter. You can't say that. And it was a real wake-up moment for me, because I thought, I didn't go to journalism school, and my parents didn't, go through a revolution to come to this country to then have their daughter become a journalist and not be able to tell the truth. And so what I saw happening was just a lot of media malfeasance, and I didn't want to be a part of it. So I decided to resign and do what I wanted, do the type of journalism that I wanted. And so I created On the Line Media, which is my, basically, my little scrappy media company. Party of One.
And,
wow!
Wow!
I've been very lucky to have had a real community come around me, support me, and I'm right now we're totally publicly funded, and we want to remain that way. Unfettered and unfiltered, as I always say. We do have a Patreon, so if you want to support our work, you can find us at patreon.com/On the Line Media. And right now, we are doing episode 23 of the podcast. We've spoken to everyone from renowned Holocaust professor and historian Omer Bartov to Israeli historian Avi Shleim, to Palestinian-Canadian lawyer Diana Boutou, to one of my favorite interviews we've done so far is with the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese.
Yeah, me too.
So these are the types of things that I've always wanted to do, and I thought, you know what, I'm turning 50 soon, and it's now or never.
Congratulations. Now or never. That's another podcast on CBC. No, I'm just kidding. They should feature you as well. But listen, that interview that you did, that discussion with the special rapporteur, was really insightful. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking the time out of, and crafting that interview. I really recommend listeners to go and find that. It's really easy, right? All they have to do is go where?
You can find it. Actually, you can find it on my YouTube page. So you could just Google Samira Mohyeddin, and it's up there. I'm in the process of actually changing the name of our YouTube page over to On the Line Media to make it more official.
But for now, it's under your name, right?
Yes.
So SamiraMohyeddin.
Correct, yes.
Mohyeddin. It's a beautiful name, Mohyeddin.
I found out, I didn't know what it meant, and I found out in my second year Islamic studies class. The professor said, "Who is Mohyeddin here?" And I put up my hand, and she said, "Do you know what your name means?" And I said, "No." I did know deen means religion.
Yeah.
But she said it means revivifier of religion. And I thought, wow, that's a lot to live up to.
Well, that's why I said you were revivifying my faith in media. That was the reason. Actually, my dad's name is Sadruddin, so I'm familiar with these names. Really, really cool. It's really, really nice connecting with you. I really do appreciate your work, and I would encourage listeners to really check it out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been lovely speaking with you.
But Samira, I would like to continue though by asking you more questions, if you're okay with that. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Tell us about the film that you are also in the middle of producing. Doing what?
Actually, I'm working on 2 documentaries right now. One is about the woman life freedom movement in Iran, which the spark was the killing of this young girl, Mahsa Amini.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that we've been working on now for almost 3 years.
Wow.
And so that's one of them.
Can you give us a sense of what you're covering? Some of the
sure.
things? Yeah.
It looks at sort of, because a lot of people I don't think understand the history of the women's movement in Iran and where it came from, this revolution, this spark that they saw over the past 2 years. So we're doing this historical look at the Iranian women's movement, the ebbs and flows of it, and how state projects the state has really built its projects on the backs of women, whether it's making them cover their hair or whether it's making them take off the hijab.
Right.
And so we sort of look at it from that angle and then position it in the historical look at sort of the socio-political history of the country. And how the women's movement is encapsulated in that.
Well, what's sort of the year spans? I mean, how far back are you going?
We're going from 1963, which is when women got the right to vote.
Okay.
Right up to today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult to tell a story like this because right now it's like at 4 hours and something. Of course, we have to cut it down. We're trying to see maybe it could become a series. So right now we're just gathering tape and doing interviews.
Okay, you're still actively taking interviews and developing. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is nowhere near completion at all. And then the other one is something that I started while I was covering the encampment at the University of Toronto, the Palestine Solidarity Encampment, which the students called the People's Circle for Palestine. On May 2nd, 2024, about 30 to 50 students breached a fence that the University of Toronto had put up on one of their fields to prevent students from making an encampment, as other students had around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they remained there for 63 days. And this was a real flashpoint in Toronto. And so I was there covering the encampment every day. And I have about 100 hours of footage. And I thought, what a great way to...
Uh-oh. This happens, folks. And so what we're going to do is just get Samira back on the line again. I'm really sorry about that. But it shouldn't be too long.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, I think we may have lost you.
Yeah, we just dropped all of a sudden. So you have a lot of footage from the encampment.
That's right. So I had about 100 hours of footage, and it was really interesting to watch, because I was filming from the inside, it was really interesting to watch the way that these students were being portrayed from the outside by the mainstream media and by agitators, pro-Israeli agitators, who would come outside the encampment and, you know, hurl all sorts of expletives at these young people who were really very savvy about what they were trying to do, right? They were trying to get their university to divest from Israeli companies and to disclose their investments in Israeli armaments or arms weapons manufacturers. Very much in the same way that students in the 90s got the University of Toronto to divest from apartheid South Africa, which took about 10 years of student mobilization. You know, the U of T, University of Toronto, went kicking and screaming towards divestment from apartheid South Africa. So I wanted to sort of really honor what these students did by making a documentary out of it. So I am starting to do that. We've got a GoFundMe going for it right now. And we've got a working title that's called 63 Days. That's how long they were inside the encampment. And so we're going to be starting that on February 1st, putting the footage together and then going back and doing interviews with some of the key players.
Right. Wow. That's a lot of stuff that you're working on. You must be really happy that you're outside of CBC and able to do the kinds of stuff that you want and take the directions that you do.
I'm keeping myself really busy. I feel like, I was telling a friend this recently, and she was like, you know, I can't keep up with all the stuff you're doing. You're putting out so much content, the interviews, the stuff on your social media, you know, and I said to her, you know, I feel like I'm someone who has just busted out of jail.
That's right.
You know, like,
that's right. We were talking about a straitjacket and how...
That's what I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Not to say CBC was a prison. That's not, I don't want to give that impression, but I really feel like, you know, my wings that were clipped are now, you know, I'm regaining my weight.
I mean, I didn't understand the extent of the sort of control that they have on your freedom and your self-expression. To be able to not go out into the community and deliver talks, or to be able to not take an assignment independently, something like, you know, covering the Nobel Prize and things like that. It's just...
You can't do that. Not as a full-time permanent employee. You know, people who are, you know, casual or on contract have a lot more freedom. And I remember when I signed my contract, a friend of mine and a colleague said to me, "Golden handcuffs." And I just kind of looked at her like,
fair enough.
What are you talking about? And then I realized much later, oh, that's what she meant. You know, and because, you know, let's face it, I mean, for a lot of people, getting a permanent full-time pensioned job at the CBC is the creme de la creme. And I'm not going to lie, it was painful to walk away from a pension and a dental plan and all of the goodies that come with that. But to be able to say what I like at this time is priceless.
Well, it's called integrity, right?
Yeah,
it's called integrity.
Journalism, I think, needs to be done.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And this is why I see the value in what you are doing. You are one of the few journalists at a particular caliber who has the networks and reach and able to do this kind of work. And so, I mean, I just commend you for that and look forward to more.
Thank you so much, Albert.
It's our pleasure. And thank you once again for taking this time out of your life and sharing a little bit about yourself with us. We really look forward to learning more about you, following your work, and having you back to discuss it.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Samira Mohyeddin. That is SAMIRA MOHYEDDIN. Please follow up with that and stay tuned. We are going to take a musical break.
هرچی گفتم و پس میگیرم میخوام عشق تو دست بگیرم